Have you ever wanted to kill a Scotsman and legally get away with it? Well, watch this video to find out how. Welcome to Medieval Madness. From about 1150 onwards, the monarchy began to play a much larger part in the management of the justice system in England. Of course, it would be several centuries before the legal system that we know today would be in place, but the start of jury-led trials began in this period. Some medieval laws and punishments seem quite shocking by today's standards, and justice during the period was certainly not without its faults and cruelties. At the beginning of the Middle Ages, the provincial lords would be responsible for upholding law and order in their own shires. But from the late 12th century, local visits known as ayres were made by regally appointed judges. The citizens were so afraid of the visiting justices that in 1233 it caused the entire population of a Cornish village to run away and hide in nearby woods. The ayres were eventually replaced by the assizes, which were periodically held in England and Wales in the late 13th century. They were usually held twice a year, at Lent in March or April, and at Trinity in July or August, although they could also be called in the winter if there were enough cases needing to be dealt with. The assizes generally covered the more serious offences such as forgery, highway robbery, murder, vagrancy, rape, infanticide, coining, and witchcraft. They were still in use until the early 1970s, when they were replaced by the permanent Crown Courts. In 1215, Pope Innocent III banned trial by ordeal. This cruel and dangerous form of judgment involved a suspect carrying out a painful task to prove their innocence. Most trials either involved water or fire, such as walking over hot coals or plucking a stone out of boiling water. If the accused's wounds healed within 3 days, then they were innocent and free to go. If not, they would be punished. By 1220, suspects were offered a trial by jury, although it proved problematic as it was thought to be wrong to force anyone to surrender themselves to this type of judgment. For many years, there was debate over how to treat someone who refused the trial, until 1275, when suspects were ordered to be tortured by being crushed under stones, known as forceful and hard punishment, truly caught between a rock and a hard place. It seemed that the prisoner would either change their mind or die. But now, as well as the more serious crimes of murder, rape, and robbery, other laws were passed that revealed further insight into what was causing concern for medieval society. During the Middle Ages, Shrovetide games became quite popular. They were a way in which the people could let off steam before the beginning of the strict season of Lent. In France, there is a 12th century reference made to a game known as Le Sol, where the ball was propelled by the hands or by sticks, as well as being kicked with the feet. In England, the Welsh monk Nennius mentions a group of boys playing with a ball in the 9th century. These ancient types of football, played in towns and villages, usually involved two teams made up by a great number of people, all fighting for an inflated pig's bladder. 2 markers would be placed, one at either end of the town, and the idea was to get there by every possible means, except for murder. It caused havoc in the streets, the destruction of property, and even death. It was alleged that an Oxford student was killed in 1303 when playing football in the High Street. Then in 1314, King Edward II banned the sport completely. It was referred to as a great noise in the city caused by hustling over large footballs, from which many evils might arise. The punishment for ignoring this law was imprisonment. In 1363, Edward III also banned football, along with hockey, cockfighting, and, quote, other such idle games. 30 local and royal laws officially forbade football in England between the years of 1314 and 1677. In 1495, another law was brought in that forbade any young men who were not nobles, such as servants or apprentices, from playing tennis. It was considered a distraction and an incitement to gambling. At Christmas, the law was relaxed, and anyone was allowed to play tennis as long as the game was indoors at the home of their master. In 1337, Edward III of England banned anyone in the land from the wearing of fur. By 1350, he went even further. Now, there was a shortage of labour due to the Black Death, and the peasants that had survived were demanding a raise in wages. The nobility was more than a little annoyed at this turn of events, and so King Edward decreed that he would control, quote, the malice of servants which were idle and not willing to serve after the pestilence. He did this by bringing in a law known as the Labourers and Artificers Act. The law was about keeping people in their place and stopping them from dressing better than their social status. Peasants were subsequently banned from wearing any fashions worn by the nobility, and had to be content with the peasant clothes that they had worn before the plague came along. It also meant that commoners were more easily recognisable at any gatherings, as uprisings were a worry for the crown. Edward went even further, still in 1367, by introducing the Statute of Diet and Apparel, specifying what was and what was not allowed, and even how much could be spent. A craftsman and his family were not allowed to wear silks, furs, or velvets, and their entire outfit should not cost more than 40 shillings. Only royalty was allowed to wear purple silk or cloth of gold, and only those above the rank of a knight were allowed to dress in sable, silk, satin, velvet, damask, or imported wool, and no female servant was permitted to wear a silver-trimmed girdle. Male fashion was becoming more and more shocking and was considered immoral because men's shirts were worn so short. So, to maintain modesty, the law was applied to the tunics. It instructed that, quote, no person under the rank of lord was to wear any gown, jacket, or coat which does not cover the genitals and buttocks. To be a lord. The fine for this was much higher, and lawbreakers were charged 20 shillings, which is just under £700 today. By the mid-15th century, a more elegant and pointed type of shoe became all the rage with men in Europe. They were called pikes or krakows because they were thought to have originated in Krakow, which was the capital of Poland at the time. The toe of the shoe would be packed with stuffing to keep them rigid and hold their shape. Some of the pikes were so long that they had to be pulled back and tied around the wearer's leg. In 1463, Edward VI's law was passed. It ordered that, quote, no knight under the rank of lord, esquire, or gentleman, nor any other person, shall wear any shoes or boots having spikes or points which exceeded the length of 2 inches. The punishment for breaking the statute was a fine of 3 shillings and 4 pence, which would be just over £100 today. And it wasn't just the men who were slaves to fashion. In 1430, Venetian women had the height of their heels limited to 3 inches. Some ladies were wearing platform shoes known as chopins of up to 30 inches high. The ladies employed small servants to walk alongside them so they could lean on their heads and steady themselves. By the year 1348, there were 100,000 people living in Venice, making it the most populated city in Europe. It was a very important trading harbour, and consequently, many sex workers made the port their home. Sailors were always looking to spend time with ladies when they had been at sea for several months. The Venetian government were happy to make the most out of the increase in tax revenue, but in 1360 they limited the opening of brothels to the area of Castelletto, near to the Rialto market. Nevertheless, business flourished, and by the 1420s, other areas were established as red light districts. A law was then passed that made it compulsory for all prostitutes to wear yellow to distinguish themselves from other ladies of a less questionable reputation for the time. From as early as 1309, King Edward II of England had passed laws that controlled what his people ate and drank. He declared that excessive spending and the, quote, outrageous consumption of meats and fine dishes by the great houses of the realm needed to end. He thought it was setting a bad example for the peasantry and that the class system needed to be preserved. In 1336, his son Edward III banned anyone from eating more than 2 courses at mealtimes. He thought that his soldiers were becoming too fat to fight and would not be able to, quote, aid their liege or lord in time of need. The law even described soup as a separate course, as some people were calling it a sauce or a condiment so that they could eat more. King Edward felt that obesity made people more likely to be immoral and sinful. Like a lot of laws, this one was also relaxed at Christmas and at other Christian festivals when 3 courses were permitted. The statute wasn't repealed until 1856, although there is no evidence that it was actually enforced, and it wasn't just in England. Charles VI and Philip VI of France also both passed sumptuary laws, as did the Venetians, who were banned from spending more than half a ducat per person per dinner in 1229. Luxurious banquets were becoming common among the rich, and there was fear that this would cause too much envy among the poorer citizens. This resentment might cause dangerous situations such as rebellion or assassination attempts of the Doge. The wealthy of the Middle Ages had an extremely varied diet. They would eat anything from beavers to swans, hedgehogs to peacocks, and everything in between. The Prerogativa Regis, or Royal Prerogative Law, which was created in 1322, states that any whale or sturgeon, either caught or washed up on the beach, belongs to the reigning monarch, as they are royal fish, the head belonging to the king and the tail to the queen. Technically, this statute is still in force, and any whales or great sturgeons taken in the sea or elsewhere within the realm should be offered to the queen. Another commodity still under royal ownership is the wild mute swan. Considered a delicacy in Europe since the 12th century, owning a swan indicated nobleness, along with other pastimes such as hawking, running with the hounds, or owning a trained warhorse. They were symbols of wealth and breeding. In 1482, the law required that only landowners of a particular revenue could keep swans, and the swans would be nicked on the beak with the owner's mark. Any unmarked swans belonged to the crown. Often eaten at banquets, swans were considered a special dish and would often be presented as the centerpiece, cooked and then redressed in their skin and feathers. They were particularly sought after for Christmas feasts. King Henry III served 40 during his Christmas festivities at Winchester in 1247. Anyone other than a registered keeper was not even allowed to interact with swans in any way, either by selling them, driving them from their land, hunting them, or trapping them. Although the present Queen of England, Elizabeth II, does not carry out her right to eat swan, as far as we know, it still remains illegal for anyone else in England to eat them because they are a protected wild bird. One of the strangest European laws of the medieval period also involves animals. If they were deemed to have committed a crime, then they could be tried in court. Larger animals such as horses, pigs and cows, and other domestic animals could be tried for the murder of humans, and if found guilty would be mutilated, exiled, or executed. Smaller creatures such as rats, mice, locusts, weevils, and other vermin who were found guilty of crop destruction would be excommunicated from the church. This was probably to make people feel less guilty about exterminating them, as they were considered all of God's creatures at a time when the church and religion meant everything. The Council of Worms in Germany decreed in 864 that a swarm of bees should be asphyxiated in their hive. They had stung a man to death, and people were afraid that their honey would be demonically tainted. In 1480, the Bishop of Autun in France ordered 3 days of processions to order the slugs that were ruining his estate to leave or be cursed. In 1266, a pig was publicly burned for killing a child, and in 1386, in Falaise, France, another was sentenced to, quote, be mangled and maimed in the head and forelegs before being hanged for tearing the face and arms of a child. The pig was dressed in male clothing before the hanging. The Norman period of history ran from 1066 with the invasion of William the Conqueror until 1154. According to one Norman costumal, which listed local laws, any person who was found to have slandered someone by calling them a manslayer or a thief must pay a very large fine. Then, standing in the centre of town, this usually meant the marketplace, they had to hold their nose and publicly confess himself a liar to everyone that walked past. Those caught lying would have to wear a white sheet and stand outside the church. As their family and friends walked by, they would have to repent and beg for their forgiveness. Other forms of public humiliation were applied throughout Europe during the Middle Ages, such as the stocks or pillory, usually used for more petty crimes like swearing or intoxication, although women would be put there for nagging. Those accused would be restrained in a wooden frame, and the locals were encouraged to throw whatever they liked at the offender: rotten food, dung, even stones. First used in 1227, every parish in England had to have its own set of stocks by English law. In fact, in 1405, a statute was brought into force that declared any village without a set was actually only a hamlet with less rights. This law is still in existence. By 1313, King Edward II of England had made many enemies amongst his own nobles and believed that an armed rebellion might be imminent. So he ordered a statute that forbade the bearing of armour or the carrying of weapons in Parliament to keep himself safe. In 1318, it seems that Thomas II, Earl of Lancaster, broke this particular law, but by this point he was too powerful to be punished. In fact, there is no evidence to assume that anyone has ever actually been charged with this offence. By the middle of the 13th century, the art of chivalry was well underway. Gallantry, bravery, and loyalty were all qualities associated with being a knight in the Middle Ages. But being bestowed with a knighthood also came with its own problems. The cost of armour and ceremonial clothing was particularly high, and not everyone was attracted to the dangers of risking their life in battle. In 1233, Roger de Sommery actually had the daring to refuse to attend his own knighting ceremony when it was offered to him by King Henry III of England. Enraged, Henry immediately created a law that made refusing a knighthood illegal, and he seized Roger de Sommery's lands. He now joins the likes of David Bowie, Stephen Hawking, and L.S. Lowry, who also turned down a knighthood, though without the threat of having their homes confiscated, I assume. During the 13th century, the Scottish knight William Wallace led an army that carried out large-level raids into the north of England across Cumbria and Northumberland. In 1297, he even defeated Edward I's English forces at Stirling Bridge during the First Scottish War of Independence. It seems that the northern city of York became slightly worried by this turn of events, and a new bylaw was brought into force that they hoped would protect them from the Scottish threat. The statute declared that it was fine to kill a Scotsman within the city walls of York if they are found outside after sunset, but only if a bow and arrow is used and the shooting does not take place on a Sunday. Similarly, the Welsh rebellions that took place between 1400 and 1415 caused panic in the nearby English city of Chester. Led by Owen Glendower, the Welsh fought bravely in several bloody battles, but were also unsuccessful in their fight for independence. The Earl of Chester was so worried about the ongoing risk to his city that he passed a law which banned the Welsh and their sympathisers from staying inside the city walls. Any Welshmen caught there between the hours of sundown and sunrise were to be decapitated. The Earl later went on to become King Henry V, and there is no evidence that either of these northern cities have repealed these laws. Thank you once again for watching this episode of Medieval Madness. Please do subscribe if you enjoy the content, as we post weekly videos here. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.